I remember the market's siren song, a whisper promising riches if only I acted now. It's a voice many of you know intimately, a relentless pressure to do something, anything, rather than endure the agonizing stillness of waiting. I've lived through that chaos, traded through that gnawing hunger, and stared into the abyss of accounts emptied by impetuous clicks. My greatest enemy was never the ticker tape, never the chart patterns, but the frantic, desperate mind that believed inaction was failure. The core of our struggle, the raw nerve that Jesse Livermore's words cut right to, is the profound tension between patience and overtrading. It's the battle between internal discipline and the emotional impulse that screams, "You're missing out." I knew, deep down, I should wait for the real setup, for the confluence of signals that offered an undeniable edge. But I couldn't bear the silence. The market felt like a roaring train, and I was terrified of being left behind on a desolate platform. The fear of missing out, the insidious greed for what could be, was a physical ache, overriding every rational thought. My finger hovered over the buy button, compelled by an invisible force, convinced that this time, this single, impulsive time, it would be different. It rarely was. The price paid for that impatience was steep, far beyond the dollars lost. It was the erosion of self-trust, the gnawing regret, the humiliation of knowing I'd violated my own rules, again and again. Each impulsive trade, each premature entry, chipped away at my confidence, leaving me with a profound sense of failure, not just as a trader, but as a person unable to control their own impulses. I felt trapped in a self-made prison of frustration and self-loathing, repeating the same destructive patterns, always chasing, always reacting, never truly leading my own trades. The market, in its cold indifference, simply took. It didn't care about my hopes or my desperation. It only registered my lack of discipline. The constant mental conflict, the daily defeat, was a burden heavier than any financial loss. It was the weight of knowing I was my own worst enemy. But then, slowly, painfully, the truth began to emerge from the wreckage. It wasn't an overnight revelation, but a hard-won understanding forged in the crucible of repeated mistakes. The epiphany hit me with the force of a market crash. Waiting isn't inaction. It is the highest form of disciplined action. It is a strategic stillness, a deliberate choice to conserve capital and mental energy until the market presents an opportunity that aligns with your defined edge. It's the ultimate expression of internal control, a triumph of the rational mind over the emotional tempest. Jesse Livermore didn't just preach patience, he embodied it. He understood that the real profits are made not through constant activity, but through profound inactivity, through the refusal to play unless the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. He taught me that the silence isn't empty. It's pregnant with potential, a canvas awaiting the precise, deliberate stroke. This realization transformed my approach. I began to see that the market is always there, always offering opportunities, but my opportunity only arises when my setup appears. It shifted from a desperate chase to a patient hunt. The fear of missing out was replaced by the confidence of knowing I was waiting for my moment, not just any moment. This journey, from the impulsive gambler to the disciplined strategist, is one many of you are on right now. You feel the pull, the internal struggle, the quiet desperation for consistency. I understand that pain because I lived it. It's not about finding a magic indicator. It's about finding the unwavering discipline within yourself. And thus, the path to redemption in trading is paved with the courage to do nothing, to sit in the quiet, and to wait for the real setup. It's a journey of self-mastery, where every moment of disciplined waiting is a victory against the most formidable opponent, ourselves. In the end, consistency isn't about constant action. It's about consistent, disciplined patience. It's about respecting the market enough to wait for its clear invitation, and respecting yourself enough to refuse anything less. Therefore, if you resonate with this struggle, if you felt the sting of impatience and the redemption of discipline, I invite you to share your thoughts. What has been your greatest lesson in waiting? Leave a comment below, like this video if it spoke to your trading soul, and subscribe to Livermore Mind for more insights into the psychology of true market discipline. A silent, self-imposed judgment, a constant whisper of inadequacy, I chased fleeting opportunities, believing each flicker was the definitive signal, the one I couldn't afford to miss. My screen became a battlefield, not against the market, but against myself. My mind, a relentless adversary, fabricating urgency where none existed. Livermore's words, "Wait for the real setup, or don't trade," echoed in my subconscious, a truth I acknowledged but failed to embody. I understood the principle intellectually. I could articulate its logic. Yet, the moment the market moved, even marginally, that intellectual grasp dissolved into a primal fear. A fear of being left behind, an irrational dread that every profitable trade was happening now, without me. The cost was not just capital, it was far more insidious. It was the erosion of trust in my own judgment. Each impulsive entry, each premature exit, chipped away at the foundation of self-belief. I became a prisoner of my own making, trapped in a cycle of regret and frustration. The market, in its cold, indifferent wisdom, simply reflected my internal chaos. It didn't reward effort, it rewarded discipline. It didn't care for my hopes. It only registered my lack of patience. The losses were not just monetary. They were psychological scars, each one deepening the conviction that I was fundamentally flawed, incapable of the self-control required for this unforgiving craft. I remember nights staring at the ceiling, replaying trades, dissecting decisions, searching for the precise moment I lost control. It was always the same trigger, the perceived urgency, the fear of missing out, the desperate need to do something. That need, that raw, unyielding impulse, was my true enemy. It wasn't the market's volatility. It was my internal volatility. The constant mental conflict, the daily defeat, was a burden heavier than any financial loss. It was the weight of knowing I possessed the knowledge, the tools, even the inherent capability, but lacked the unwavering resolve to apply them consistently. The market taught me, brutally, that true mastery lay not in predicting every move, but in mastering myself. It wasn't about being right, it was about being patient. It wasn't about action, it was about deliberate inaction. The silence, the waiting, became my greatest teacher. It forced me to confront that gnawing hunger, that internal tremor that demanded engagement. I learned to sit with it, to observe it, to acknowledge its presence without succumbing to its command. This was not a passive waiting. It was an active, disciplined vigilance. A focused observation, honing my perception, allowing the market to reveal its true intentions, rather than projecting my own desires onto its movements. The real setup, I discovered, wasn't just a pattern on a chart. It was a state of mind. It was the confluence of external signals aligning perfectly with an internal calm. It was the absence of doubt, the quiet confidence that arose from meticulous preparation and absolute adherence to my defined rules. Livermore understood this. He didn't chase, he waited. He allowed the market to come to him, to present its undeniable opportunities. This required an almost superhuman level of self-control, a stoic detachment from the immediate gratification that so many traders crave. My journey towards this understanding was paved with countless failures. Each impulsive trade was a lesson, albeit a painful one, etched into my memory. The pain was the catalyst. It forced a reckoning. I had to choose: continue down the path of emotional reactivity and certain ruin, or embrace the austere discipline of patience. The choice became stark, undeniable. The market does not negotiate with emotion. It simply executes. I began to see the market not as a beast to be tamed, but as a vast ocean. And I, the sailor, had to wait for the right winds, the right currents, the perfect conditions, before setting sail. To launch impulsively into a storm was not courage. It was folly. The real setup became more than a technical term. It became a philosophy. It represented clarity, confluence, and conviction. It was the moment when all the pieces aligned, when the risk was quantifiable, and the potential reward justified the engagement. Anything less was noise. Anything less was a gamble, not a trade. The transformation was gradual, agonizing. It required a ruthless self-assessment, a stripping away of ego and false bravado. I had to admit my weaknesses, confront my fears, and rebuild my trading identity from the ground up. This meant spending more time observing, less time acting. More time planning, less time reacting. The screen, once a source of frantic urgency, slowly transformed into a canvas for strategic contemplation. The urge to constantly be in the game diminished, replaced by a profound respect for the power of stillness. The quiet confidence grew, not from winning every trade, but from adhering to my principles, irrespective of the outcome. This was the true victory, the mastery of self. The market then became a reflection of this internal order, rather than a mirror of my chaos. It was the weight of knowing that every decision was mine alone, and that true power lay in the deliberate choice to wait. The deliberate choice to wait. This wasn't merely inaction. It was a profound act of self-control, a conscious defiance of primal urges. It meant accepting that opportunity was not fleeting, but cyclical, a recurring tide rather than a single breaking wave. It meant understanding that the market would always offer another chance, provided I preserved my capital and my sanity. This realization was not an epiphany. It was hammered into me by painful lessons. Each impulsive trade was a brick in the wall of my self-made prison. Each moment of disciplined inaction, a chisel chipping away at it. The transformation was slow, arduous, demanding constant vigilance against old, ingrained habits. My mind, once a tempest, slowly began to quiet. The internal chatter, the insistent demands to act, diminished in volume, though they never entirely ceased. They became whispers I could observe, not commands I had to obey. This active waiting was a different kind of engagement. It was not idleness. It was intense observation, a forensic analysis of price action, volume, and market sentiment. I learned to discern genuine signals from deceptive noise, not with my emotions, but with a cold, objective eye. The screen was no longer a stage for my anxieties, but a data stream to be interpreted, its patterns speaking a language I learned to understand. I sought confluence, not merely a single indicator. I looked for the market to confirm its intentions, to show its hand, rather than projecting my own desires onto its movements. This required intellectual honesty, previously absent. I had to acknowledge when my setup wasn't truly there, when conditions weren't optimal. Even if my ego yearned for action, even if the fear of missing out gnawed at my resolve. Livermore's wisdom became less a theoretical concept and more a lived reality. He spoke of big money made, not in quick, reactive trades, but in long, patient waits for significant moves. He understood that the vast majority of market activity was irrelevant, a distraction designed to ensnare the impatient. My own experience echoed this truth. The trades that yielded substantial profit were those where I had waited, sometimes for days, even weeks, for perfect alignment. These were trades executed with calm conviction, born of certainty, not desperation. The ones where I felt no urgency, only a quiet knowing that the time was right, that the edge was undeniable. The greatest challenge wasn't just identifying the setup. It was the sustained emotional discipline required to not trade when it wasn't present. This was the true crucible. The market, in its endless gyrations, continuously tempts. It flashes tantalizing hints of movement, creating the illusion of opportunity where none truly existed by my rules. To resist these temptations, to sit on my hands when every fiber of my being screamed for engagement, was an act of profound self-mastery. It was a constant battle against the ingrained human desire for immediate gratification, against the insidious fear of missing out that plagued me. I learned to view these emotional impulses, not as weaknesses to be suppressed, but as objective signals to be observed, understood, then deliberately overridden by my higher discipline, by my commitment to my strategy. The psychological landscape within me shifted. The daily struggle transformed from a fight against the market to a refinement of my internal state. My goal was no longer merely to make money, though a practical necessity. It was to execute my strategy flawlessly, to embody the principles of patience and discipline, irrespective of the immediate financial outcome. The profits, when they came, were a byproduct of this internal alignment, not the primary focus. This subtle but profound reorientation changed everything. It removed the desperate, frantic edge from my trading, replacing it with a quiet confidence, a deep sense of control over my own actions, if not over the market itself. I began to appreciate the stark beauty of stillness, The immense power in deliberate inaction. The market would move, yes, but its movements were often chaotic, unpredictable noise. The real opportunities, the real setups, were rare. Pristine moments of clarity emerging from this chaos. They were diamonds in the rough, visible only to the patient, discerning eye, to the mind unclouded by greed or fear. To rush in prematurely was to contaminate these moments, to dilute their potential with my own impatience, to gamble rather than to trade. Each time I waited, each time I let a mediocre opportunity pass by, I reinforced my discipline, building mental fortitude, brick by painful brick. The regret of a missed trade, I discovered, was fleeting, a momentary pang. The regret of an impulsive losing trade, however, lingered, corroding my spirit, undermining my resolve. This profound understanding of waiting was not about being passive. It was about being strategically selective, intensely active in my observation, but rigorously passive in my execution, until the conditions were perfect. It was about preserving my mental capital as much as my financial capital. Every trade I didn't take, because it didn't meet my rigorous criteria, was a victory. It was a reaffirmation of my commitment to my rules, a strengthening of my resolve. This discipline became a shield, protecting me from the market's relentless psychological warfare. It allowed me to approach each potential setup with a clear head, unburdened by past mistakes or future anxieties. The silence, once terrifying, became a sanctuary, a space for clarity and strategic thought. The market, in turn, revealed its patterns with greater clarity. When my mind was quiet, when my emotions were subdued, I could see the underlying currents, the true intentions of larger players, the institutional flows that moved price. It was as if I had donned a new pair of glasses, capable of filtering out the distracting glare and focusing on the essential. The real setup was not something I had to force into existence. It was something I allowed to unfold before me, patiently. It was an alignment of price, volume, and time that spoke to a high probability of success, an undeniable edge that presented itself rather than being chased. It was the market saying, "Here I am. Are you ready?" And I learned to be ready, not with eagerness, but with a calm, deliberate readiness, a readiness born of absolute conviction in my process. This shift, from chasing to waiting, from reacting to observing, was the bedrock of my transformation. It was the quiet revolution that finally brought peace to my trading, and to my mind. This quiet revolution was not a sudden epiphany, but a slow, arduous recalibration of my entire being. It meant dismantling years of ingrained habits, of knee-jerk reactions to every market flicker. The initial discomfort of inaction was immense, a phantom limb ache for the frenetic pace I once knew. But I persevered. I learned to distinguish between true market signals and the seductive noise, the constant chatter designed to draw in the undisciplined. My focus narrowed. No longer did I scan countless charts, chasing every perceived opportunity. Instead, I concentrated on a select few, those that consistently offered the clearest patterns, the most unambiguous confluence of factors. This selective approach was a direct consequence of my commitment to the real setup. It wasn't about being busy. It was about being right, and waiting for the undeniable confirmation. The fear of missing out, once a paralyzing force, began to recede. I understood now that every profitable move I didn't take, because it didn't align with my stringent criteria, was not a loss, but a preservation of capital and mental energy. It was a victory of discipline over impulse. The market, I realized, was an endless river of opportunities. Missing one particular wave did not mean the river would dry up. It simply meant waiting for the next, more suitable current. This perspective liberated me. It allowed me to observe the market with a detached curiosity, rather than a desperate hunger. My emotional involvement diminished proportionally to my increased adherence to my rules. My trade entries became surgical. No more guessing, no more hoping. Each position was a deliberate act, executed only when the setup was so clear, so compelling, that it felt almost inevitable. The risk was precisely defined, the reward potential carefully assessed. This wasn't about avoiding risk entirely. It was about embracing calculated risk. Risk that had a quantifiable edge. Risk that respected my capital and my mental well-being. The impulsive trades, the ones born of impatience and fear, carried an invisible, yet crushing, psychological cost. They eroded the disciplined trades, even when they resulted in a loss, reinforced my process, strengthening my conviction in my methodology. The outcome of a single trade became less important than the integrity of the process itself. This shift in focus from outcome to process was transformative. It inoculated me against the emotional swings of profit and loss. A losing trade, if executed according to my rules, was simply a data point, a cost of doing business, not a personal failure. A winning trade, if it violated my rules, was a dangerous anomaly, a reinforcement of bad habits, and therefore a greater threat to my long-term success. This counterintuitive understanding was a cornerstone of my new discipline. It meant valuing adherence to principles above immediate gratification. It meant understanding that true success in this arena was a marathon of consistent, disciplined action, not a sprint of impulsive wins. I began to see my trading account not as a scorekeeping mechanism for my ego, but as a strategic asset to be protected and deployed only under optimal conditions. Every dollar preserved from an ill-advised trade was a dollar available for the real setup when it finally presented itself. This conservative approach, born of past losses and deep reflection, became my strongest defense. It fostered a resilience that no amount of aggressive trading could ever provide. The market could be volatile, unpredictable, and punishing, but my internal world, my approach, remained steadfast. The internal dialogue, though never completely silent, now had a different tone. The insistent voice of impatience still whispered, but it was met with a stronger, calmer voice of reason and discipline. I learned to acknowledge the impulse without acting on it, to observe the emotional tremor without succumbing to its command. This was not suppression, it was mastery. It was the conscious choice to operate from a place of strategic clarity, rather than emotional reactivity. The mental energy previously consumed by regret and fear was now channeled into meticulous analysis, into refining my understanding of market dynamics, into perfecting my waiting game. The waiting became a form of active meditation. It sharpened my awareness, allowed me to perceive subtle shifts in momentum and sentiment that I had previously missed in my frantic pursuit of action. It was in these periods of stillness that I truly began to understand the market's rhythm, its underlying currents, its deceptive pauses and explosive surges. The market, I realized, often rewards those who do nothing, those who possess the profound patience to let events unfold, to let clarity emerge from chaos. Livermore's teachings, once abstract concepts, were now etched into my very being, not just as rules, but as lived experience, as undeniable truths forged in the crucible of my own struggles. The profound insight was that control over my trading was not about controlling the market, but about controlling myself, my impulses, my fears, and my greed. It was about creating an internal environment where discipline thrived, making the real setup not just a possibility, but an inevitable consequence of my unwavering commitment to my process. The market, once a source of terror and frantic pursuit, transformed. It became a landscape of opportunities, clearly delineated from the noise. When the real setup finally emerged, it was unmistakable. There was no internal debate, no lingering doubt. The decision to act was calm, almost mechanical, devoid of the emotional static that once plagued me. My finger, once trembling with impatience, now moved with quiet certainty. This wasn't about suppressing emotion entirely. It was about channeling it, using the energy of conviction, rather than the chaos of fear or greed. Each trade, executed under these conditions, felt different. It wasn't a gamble. It was a calculated deployment of capital, an extension of my disciplined process. The outcome, whether profit or loss, was secondary to the integrity of the execution. This detachment, this focus on process over immediate result, was the ultimate liberation. It meant I was no longer a slave to the market's whims, but an active participant, choosing my moments with surgical precision. The freedom gained was immense. Freedom from regret, from the gnawing self-reproach of impulsive actions. It was the freedom to step away from the screen, knowing I had done everything within my power to adhere to my principles, to wait for the undeniable edge. The market would continue its dance, But I would only join when the music was perfectly aligned, when the steps were clear, and my conviction absolute. This was the quiet power Livermore spoke of, the immense strength found in disciplined inaction, in waiting for the optimal moment. It was the antithesis of the frantic chase, the calm before the storm, the knowing silence before a decisive move. And so, the frantic chase ceased. The market, once a tempestuous sea, became a predictable current, navigable to the disciplined eye. My internal landscape, once a battlefield, settled into a profound calm. The real setup was no longer an elusive ghost, but a tangible, almost palpable entity, emerging with undeniable clarity from the noise. There was no more internal debate, no lingering doubt when the moment arrived. The decision to act was calm, almost mechanical, devoid of the emotional static that once plagued me. My finger, once trembling with impatience, now moved with quiet certainty, an extension of a mind at peace. Each trade, executed under these conditions, felt different. It wasn't a gamble. It was a calculated deployment of capital, an extension of my disciplined process. The outcome, whether profit or loss, became secondary to the integrity of the execution itself. This detachment, this unwavering focus on process over immediate result, was the ultimate liberation. It meant I was no longer a slave to the market's whims, but an active participant, choosing my moments with surgical precision. The freedom gained was immense. Freedom from regret, from the gnawing self-reproach of impulsive actions. It was the freedom to step away from the screen, knowing I had done everything within my power to adhere to my principles, to wait for the undeniable edge. The market would continue its dance, but I would only join when the music was perfectly aligned, when the steps were clear, and my conviction absolute. This was the quiet power Livermore spoke of, the immense strength found in disciplined inaction, in waiting for the optimal moment. It was the antithesis of the frantic chase, the calm before the storm, the knowing silence before a decisive move. Ultimately, the conflicts within me, the fear of missing out, the desperate need for action, the erosion of self-trust were resolved not by conquering the market, but by conquering myself. The market simply reflected my internal state. When I found discipline, it revealed opportunity. Therefore, my journey culminated, not just in consistent profitability, but in an unshakable inner peace, a quiet confidence born of self-mastery. The market's siren song still whispers, still tempts, but its call no longer controls me. I hear it, acknowledge it, and then choose my response, always aligned with my principles. Livermore's words are no longer a distant echo, but the very foundation of my being. Wait for the real setup, or don't trade. This is the ultimate freedom. It's the cessation of internal warfare, the profound calm of a mind at peace with its own discipline. I no longer chase. I simply exist within the market's rhythm, a patient observer, ready for clarity. The greatest lesson was not about predicting price, but about mastering myself. It was about forging an unbreakable will, a commitment to process that transcends outcome. This journey, painful as it was, led to a profound understanding. The market doesn't care about your effort, only your discipline. And so, the true victory is not in the profits, but in the unwavering adherence to the truth you have painstakingly discovered. It is a solitary path, demanding relentless self-honesty. But the reward, the quiet confidence, the liberation from impulse, is immeasurable. If my journey resonates, if you too have felt the gnawing hunger of impatience, perhaps you recognize this path. This is not just a story of trading. It is a testament to the power of self-mastery. May it serve as a mirror, reflecting your own potential for enduring discipline. Consider sharing your own reflections in the comments below, or subscribe to this channel for more insights forged in the crucible of experience.